Hello, parents, and thank you, Mr. Chavez, for the warm welcome. And I appreciate those of you that took the time to come and meet for this really important workshop because, although it's a touchy subject, I think it's really important that, you guys are aware of what plans that we have in place at school for your children. So you know that they're safe and you know that we are constantly on the lookout for them. And also so you are aware of what you can do at home as well. So it's going to be brief, but also, like straight to the point. If you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. So let's get started. Okay. So here's a little backstory, just something to kind of reflect on because it struck me even as an individual myself. It happened recently, this past February. It was a family in Utah, here in the United States. They shared on the news that their 12-year-old son committed suicide after he was bullied for more than a year by one of his classmates. He wasn't really open about being bullied. He was very private about it. Parents weren't really aware what was going on until he came home with a black eye. That's a little backstory on the student. That's when parents started asking, well, what's going on? Why are you home with a black eye? What's going on? And he didn't share much. He just kind of said, oh, it was an accident, whatever. And he went to his room. His parents, they kept an eye on him that night, but they'd let him they just assumed he was going to rest, go to his bedroom, relax. And then his sister walks in the bedroom and he had hung himself with a jacket, 12 years old. And I tell you guys this story because not only did it break my heart, but this family shared this story openly with details because they wanted to build more awareness to parents and families and even educators, because it's something that unless you're really checking in with that student, noticing differences in their behaviors, how they react, how they socialize, you're not really going to know, just like these parents didn't know, right? So something to keep in mind as we move forward with this presentation. Like I said, it's going to be very heavy stuff, but it's something that we have to discuss. We're adults, we have to get through it, right? So just a little background definition. What is suicide, right? So in LAUSD especially, we don't call it committing suicide anymore. We call it death by suicide. So that's something that we try to say differently now in the school setting, is because we don't want to say commit, that is, someone's committing to that behavior. We want to say that the death was caused by that, right? So, it's caused by self-directed injurious behavior with the intent to die, right? There may be other events that cause it, like maybe there's a breakup in the family or a recent death of a loved one prior to someone causing that death, right? It might be important to remember that, suicide, it's so complex that there might not even be just one cause, like that one particular student being bullied. There might have been other things going on for him, and that's why it happened, right? And then just remember, with suicide now the second most common cause of death among young people between the ages of 10 to 24, it's important to know the risk factors and be ready to support your children, right? It's really unfortunate that the age has gotten so much younger. And there's so many factors, but I want you guys to at least know what those risk factors are. So it's something you can keep an eye out for, especially with so much that's been going on these last few years, like we've dealt with, COVID, we've dealt with closures and anxiety. So all that alone is trauma for these kids, and that could be a factor as well. So let's look into some risk factors, okay? What is risk factors? It's characteristics or conditions that can increase that risk for your child to want to, think of suicide, right? Or even just have thoughts of it can be dangerous, right? It can be biological, psychological, or social factors. Sometimes it can be genetic. There's been research on that if there's a history of it with mental health issues, it's more likely to be an impact on your children as well. But risk factors could be like, do they have access to means, like ways that they could hurt themselves, like knives, firearms? Do they know where the medicine cabinet is? These are really important things for parents and guardians to keep in mind, of how easy it is to access some of these dangerous things in your house. Maybe there's stressors going on, like maybe there's a loss of a loved one. Maybe there's peer issues going on, whether it's at home or at school, and they're coming home and sharing that with you. Or there might even be gender identity issues, because I know that's happening more lately. And we're very welcoming of that in Apperson, but it could still be an issue for some students because they're struggling with themselves and trying to understand themselves. So that's definitely a stressor as well. Or even just a history of depression, mental illness, substance alcohol abuse disorders, history of suicide in the family. I've worked with students who they've had family members who have died from suicide, and then or just history of mental health in the family, as I mentioned, right? It could be anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, things like that. Okay. And then what are the signs? What are some things that you can look for as a parent, and what we look at school? What are some signs, right? So obviously there's one, feelings of sadness, hopelessness, or helplessness, especially when it's a student who before would be motivated to go to school and get their work done and they're doing good in school, they're playing with friends. If there's a change in their behavior, that's obviously going to be a red flag, and we want to check in with them. That is number one, right? So significant changes in behavior, maybe their appearance, maybe they used to care about their hygiene, things like that, and then all of a sudden they don't because their head is wrapped around other stuff right now. Or social withdrawal, isolation. Are they not playing with others abruptly? Are they not interacting in the classroom, at home? Do you feel like they're not talking to you, mom and dad, or guardians? Do you feel like suddenly they're just kind of not talking when they get home and they go to their room and just want to be alone? These are things that you want to look for, right? Are they leaving notes? Are they leaving little signals for you? Are they writing stuff in their diary that maybe you witnessed or they're shared? It could even be drawings. Maybe they're drawing stuff that might not be typical for a child, right? Are they actually showing self-injurious behaviors? Example could be cutting. That's a very common one. Cutting on the wrists, the legs. It's something to keep an eye out as well. Sometimes they might try to cover their wrists and stuff too, right? So if they're hiding it even more so, it's something to keep an eye out for, right? Or if they're suddenly even just fixated on death in general. Are they thinking about death or what happens after death or things like that? Those are definitely red flags as well, okay? There's nothing wrong with explaining to your child about it, right? That's completely up to you as their guardians or parent. But ultimately, if you're noticing it's a sudden fixation, that can be concern, and you'd want to check in with them about that. And I'll get into that, what I mean by checking in. Are they discussing like final arrangements in some way, right? Or are they talking about it on social media? I know social media is very big right now. And that's something to keep in mind too, like the internet access. What are they access to, and what are they sharing online, right? Especially when they're playing online with online friends and things like that. What are they reporting to those friends, right? And these are the same signs that we look at school as well, just so you guys know. And then what are the procedures typically? What do we do at school so that you guys are aware of what the process is, okay? So you know that, we're constantly, we're trained, we know what to look for, and this is kind of like a list of that. So obviously we respond immediately, whether it's a teacher reporting to us something, whether it's to me, Mr. Chavez, we're responding immediately. We want to check in with that student. We don't wait days. We don't investigate before checking in with your child if they report something. We immediately want to talk to that child, make sure they're safe, and we interview them, okay? We secure to make sure they're safe. And then we would do a suicide risk assessment, which I typically would do. If it's not me, it would probably be Mr. Chavez or another trained individual on campus at the time of the event. Just because I'm here sharing the presentation, I can kind of go over that part a little bit. So basically the threat assessment or suicide risk assessment would be an interview. I try to keep it as natural as possible for the child so that they don't feel nervous or they don't feel like they're in trouble. And it would be a specific set of questions, like just to kind of get an idea of where they're at mentally and what are they thinking? Do they have a plan? And that level of risk is determined based on their responses. And parents and guardians, you will be contacted that day when it happens, right? So we won't keep you out of the loop. We're going to make sure that you guys know what's going on at all times, because it's your child and we want you to know that, to make sure they're safe too. And then that's the thing is, besides contacting you, depending on the risk factor, how high the level is, if it's moderate or high, we may have to call an emergency contact list, which is, whether it's 911 or we have other designated numbers through LAUSD that we would call. But you wouldn't be kept out of the loop in that. You would be involved in that as well, so you know what's going on. And we wouldn't leave your child at a site. We'd have to keep them in our office or somewhere within another adult, so they're never left alone, okay? And even, we don't take any comment lightly. So even if a child mentions the slightest thing, we want to make sure the child is safe at all costs. That's ultimately what we want for Apperson and what we want when they go home as well. Okay, so what's next, right? So after we assess the child, we collaborate with at least one other adult, whether it's me, Mr. Chavez, a teacher, and then parent, of course, to determine that level of risk, right? Are they safe to even go back to class? Are they safe to even go home? Do we, that's what would determine based on the risk assessment, right? And, it's ultimately, it's just to keep the child safe because we never know what can happen and we just want to make sure that they're okay, especially with everything that's happened these last few years. We don't want to take anything lightly. Okay. And then these are some of the numbers that we call, and I'll leave it on the screen. And, if you want to screenshot it, if you're on your iPhone, cell phone, or just take a picture of it. I think it's really important for you guys to have these numbers as well. But these are the numbers that we would call in the event of a high-risk student, meaning they have a plan. They have a very detailed idea of the means of access to hurt themselves, like I mentioned earlier, the knives, the medication. If they have a plan, that's obviously going to be a high risk, right? So we would immediately call one of these numbers so that they can further support us to transport to a hospital or whatever it would be, okay? All right. Oh, and just so you also keep in mind, the privacy of all students, it's protected at all times, right? So we're not disclosing confidential information to just anybody. It's, within the basis of parent, guardian, the staff that know the child. We're not going to just share all information about that child to just anybody, okay? Just so you know, we keep confidentiality. Okay, so the action plan. Once it's identified, the level of risk, school staff's required to report any concerns, right? So like I said, our job is that if we don't report it, we can get in big trouble, right? So, I gave this presentation to staff, staff's trained as well. They're constantly working with these kids, and if they report anything, they are required as the adult to report it to one of us, right? So that we can take further action that same day. And I mentioned this to you guys as well, because, just so you know that we take it very seriously and we want to make sure that that your children are in good hands when it comes to that. We always have our radars on, okay? And then this leads to what you can do as the parents, right? Just check in with your child, right? And I know it's like, oh, you probably think, I know I do that, but it kind of goes beyond, did you get your homework done? It goes beyond, how was school? Sometimes we can get caught up with work and other things in our life, right? And we just assume our children are fine because they don't say anything, or they'll just kind of say, yeah, school's okay, and they don't say much more. It's important, just keep a supportive, non-judgmental line of communication open for your children, right? Because that little bit could make a difference, and they might share things that might make the difference of life and death, right? Especially if they're at an increased risk, whether there was a recent event or something going on at school or something they're stressed about, right? So constantly checking in with your child is going to be really important, okay? And just like we do as educators, you can teach your child healthy habits at home, taking care of your mental health, your own mental health as the adult. Be a good role model for them, whether it's your physical health, your mental health, and just talking openly and welcoming conversations, right? Even if it's 5 minutes, just open up conversation with them, like dig deeper to get them to open up more, especially if they're very shy expressing their emotions, because it's not always easy, and then if you do notice that, maybe there is some support needed, there's therapy, there's other supports available to the public. Whether you have medical insurance, whether you don't, there's a lot of options. I can provide some of those resources for you guys if you're interested. I'll share my contact information, and that's something that I could provide as well through the Sunland area some resources you can look into if that's something you're interested in. But you know your child best, right? Ultimately, keep an eye out for changes in their behaviors, their actions, and just how they express themselves. That's the main thing for you as parents to understand. Like, is this beyond what they're typically acting like? Is this beyond how they usually act? Just, something to keep in mind, and you know them best. We give suggestions, but ultimately you're going to know your child best and the goodness of your heart, right? Yeah. And then I included some contact information. So I highly recommend you screenshot this page for some numbers for support. They're 24/7, a lot of them, whether it's for suicide prevention or, maybe your child just needs someone to talk to in the moment that's an emergency. And we also have a wellness hotline right here through LAUSD as well, which is Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on school days only. Okay. So that's something that's nice to know as well. And, ultimately, I think it's good to just have these as resources, put it on your fridge, just have it on your phone ready to go, because you never know, right? I mean, look at that 12-year-old boy that I shared at the beginning of the presentation, right? We never know until it can be too late. So there's that, okay? And that concludes my presentation, and I really appreciate those of you that came in. Thank you so much.